Interview with Captain Cornelius C. Sullivan, retired of the San Francisco Fire Department, January 23, 1976, carried out in his home in the Sunset District.
My name is Cornelius C. Sullivan, retired Captain San Francisco Fire Department, from which I retired to take the position of Chief of the Naval Facility at Treasure Island at the Navy's request during the war. The following is a story of my memories of many jobs I held from my arrival in San Francisco to my release from the Navy as Fire Chief at Treasure Island. San Francisco at that time was a great and growing commercial city where all vehicular transportation was horse-drawn. Browsing through the main post office at 7th and Mission on a Sunday afternoon, I saw an ad for a vacancy on the lifeboat crew at Fort Point Life-Saving Station in the Presidio, in what is now the west end of the present Crissy Field. I applied and got the job on the crew. My experience in the handling of boats as a boy in my native Ireland served the purpose, as I blended in with a crew of fine men, experienced seamen, from whom I learned much, and which I applied on many occasions during my years of public service. At this station I learned a lot about the Presidio and its environs, including shipping in and out of the harbour with incidents of great importance, forts and types of armaments protecting our gate. From now on I wish to avoid the word I as much as possible and use the word we, for the reason that without the advice, assistance and good fellowship of the men with whom I worked, could not be accomplished. We saw ships of every nation enter and leave the harbour, and from all ports of the world, which was an education which few experienced. The British, German, French, Holland, Swedish and Norwegian, all freighters commonly called tramp steamers, bringing in cargoes of every nature and taking out products to many parts of the world. Our own ships plied the ports of faraway places also. The Pacific mails, 2 ships, the Manchuria and Mongolia, sailed semi-monthly to the ports of Japan, China and the Philippines. The Matson lines sailed to many of the islands of Hawaii. The Spreckle steamers to Australia and islands of South Pacific. All the above ships were square or 4.5 rigged so that they could sail and when winds were favourable, thus saving coal. The Pacific Coast steamers sailed to ports from Puget Sound to San Diego. All carried freight and passengers. A fleet of steam schooners carrying loads of lumber from the great forests of our coast to Meg's Wharf and Pope and Talbot lumber docks, where it was processed and made ready for building of our San Francisco. We recall the first Japanese merchant vessels to enter our port. They were beautiful vessels painted white with yellow superstructure and had clipper bows. The officers were British and Americans temporarily. There were 2 serious incidents which we recall, both sailing vessels with cargoes of coal for San Francisco from Newcastle, Australia. The ship Shenandoah, entering port during a heavy fog, grounded on the north edge of Potato Patch. Luckily the surf was smooth. Through the efforts of the lifeboats and tugs she was pulled off without serious damage and proceeded in tow to the coal docks. She was an American vessel. A similar case occurred under like conditions, a British barque, the Falls of Clyde, while in the doldrums grounded at Long Beach, which is now called Baker's Beach, on a sandy bottom and was pulled off without injury. The steamer Alameda, while clearing for Australia in a daylight proceeding through the gate during a heavy Thule fog, grounded on the east reef off Fort Point seawall. She was pulled off at the next high tide with slight damage. Shortly thereafter a like occurrence came when the British freighter, the Damara, loaded with grain for Liverpool, lighters came alongside and much of the cargo was unloaded, lighting the vessel. She also was pulled off without serious injury. This occurred at midday, and all due to a tule fog, that dense fog that floats from the delta out through the gate, about 50 feet above waterline. Many other wrecks occurred at the heads and in the straits during our service at 4 Point Life-Saving Station. The fuel in all vessels those days was coal. Oil came later. The fertile valleys of Marin, Tamales, and Inverness, whose dairy products, butter, eggs, and vegetables came to the city market by small vessels operated by gas engines and sail. The crews of those boats were thorough seamen who understood the actions of wind and wave, and who took advantage of it all. We on lookout duty heard the put-put of their motors or the shadow of their sails while making the journey to market. They always travelled before dawn in order to get to the market in time for the market's opening. Other vessels on the same errand bringing in produce from the Petaluma Valley using what was then called the Petaluma Slough. They made their regular trips to the city market. The hay scows from the hay pastures on the river deltas, and the brick scows hauling their cargo from the brickyards at McNear's Point. All those small vessels were assured of a return cargo of goods and equipment for their farm industry. Two beautiful speedy vessels, the Arrow and the General Frigsby, ran regularly from the ferry building in San Francisco to the naval shipyard at Mare Island and the city of Vallejo and that neighborhood. Passengers and cargo traffic was heavy, as this was the then principal means of transportation. We recall the Norwegian sloop Gougeot, which sailed the Northwest Passage under the command of the great explorer and navigator Roland Amundsen, with its crew of hardy Norsemen, which took 3 years. She was pulled ashore at the foot of Fulton Street during a gentle surf and placed in the berth in the Golden Gate Park. After years in this position, she was taken back to her native home in Norway. We saw her come in and we saw her leave. Our famous ferry boats bringing the workers to San Francisco offices and trades and delivering them safely to their home. The beautiful stern-wheeler river boats were called floating palaces, plying between San Francisco dockside to Sacramento, and whose decks and ballrooms great and happy times were held. All of this, of course, was before motorized traffic. One of the highlights of our tour of duty at the 4 Point Life-Saving Station was the arrival of the Great White Fleet commanded by Admiral Fighting Bob Evans on his flagship, the battleship Connecticut, which led the armada of battleship cruisers, torpedo boats, and colliers and other supply vessels. This was the greatest naval fleet ever to enter our bay up to that time, and was indeed a beautiful sight. We recall this happened around May the 12th, 1908. We hear from time to time through the media where some individuals or group suggest they can find the wreck of the steamer Rio de Janeiro, lost while making port during a heavy fog on the night of February the 22nd, 1901. This incident, as told to me and as entered in the log at the station at 4 Point by the man who reported it at the time, Mark Ellingsson, a member of the crew, a fine retiring man, a native of Trondheim, Norway. During night patrol from the old fort along the rugged coast to the auxiliary boathouse at Long Beach, on this patrol we carried a lighted lantern and 2 rockets, like Roman candle type, for signaling purposes. On the return trip he heard voices from beyond the surf. He hailed, waved his lantern and fired a rocket to get their attention, which he did from a voice in English, stating he was in a lifeboat with a number of the crew, all Chinese, from the steamer Rio de Janeiro, which struck Mile Rock, tearing her hull apart, and she slipped into deep water with heavy loss of life. Mark Ellison gave this voice his location and encouragement to hold on while he called for help. He climbed the bluff to the lookout, phoned the station, who in return called the Custom House, Marine Exchange, and tugboats. The lifeboat was manned and launched in all haste and proceeded to the ship's lifeboat, where the English-speaking person gave the same account. All this was and always, as always, recorded in the station log. The opinion of those in authority at the time was that the vessel slid into deep water and salvaging was remote. Portions of the top hamper's wreckage were found along the shores, even into the bay, while the tides, rips and otherwise, the weather could account for. 2 years later, the lighthouse service erected a tower-like lighthouse on the highest rock with a foghorn. This fragmentary story by memories of the dim past is a feeble way of stringing together my thoughts as I recall them. Almost all are happy memories, in fact. Those men from whom I learned much have all passed into their honourable rewards. One thought I never forgot, was the fact that I was in a country which gave me a chance and privilege to work and live with my family with safety and freedom. Hallelujah.
This is the 9th of November, 1972. We're here at the home of Miss Meriam Nagel on Cascade Drive in Mill Valley, California. And we're about to talk to Miss Nagel about her life in and around Fort Point. I guess for the record, I should tell who I am. I'm Charlie Hawkins, park technician for the Fort Point National Historic Site and a longtime friend of Miss Nagel. Now, we don't want to put you on the spot, but do you want to tell us what year you were born?
Yes, 1906.
You were born
April the 28th, 1906.
And you were
that
born.
That was 10 days after the earthquake.
You were born 10 days after the earthquake.
On the 28th.
And I understand now you were born in one of the houses that used to be behind the fort?
On the hill, the one that was closest to the fort. 2 generations of the family were born there, and my mother was born in the original home, which was further up the hill, almost on the location of the old Fort San Joaquin. And that was a prefab house that was brought around the Horn. And as I remember them telling, that thinking that they may have, or might have, some windy days and nights, the house was secured by cables that were run down into the cliff. It was brought in around the Horn, and it was a duplex.
Now, can you tell us about why your family was living in this house, or the houses?
Well, that house, the duplex, was the original lighthouse dwelling for the station.
All right. So who was operating the lighthouse now?
James Rankin.
And he was there for quite a while, if I recall.
He was there from 1878 until March of 1919.
How did the men get into the fort?
Before they built the first bridge, and that was when the duplex and all that thing, they had to go from their homes way up there on the hill, down the hill, and along the road and in through the Sallyport, and then climb up to the light tower.
Then later they built a bridge.
Then they built the bridge across.
Okay. Now, can you tell us something about the light As you recall it?
Well, as I recall it, well, we loved to climb up there with my granddad, and he used to let me polish the brass. And I remember that they had a steel cable fastened on the base of the frame that held the lens. And that went down through a large, would you call it a pipe, conduit, or what have you? And that went down through the lighthouse to the, I think it was the top of the fort, in that stairwell. And that was, and on that was a stone disc that fit just inside like a lid, but moved. I mean, it would go up and down. It didn't make a lid. It just was a piece that went in and out. They wound up the cable, and the time that it took for the cable to unwind and take that disc down to the floor was the 4 hours that the man was on watch.
How did they wind the cable up? Do you recall? Did it have a big crank?
I think they had a crank there on the wall.
But it went down from the light to the top of the stairwell there.
Mm-hmm. To the top of the fort. And that took, the way they had it timed, it took the 4 hours. So they had 4-hour watches. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned the fog signal. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. Well, I have pictures that would be more explanatory, but it was a small cement building.
Was that located on the...
That was on the direct west end of the fort.
That part that sticks out?
Yeah, that little piece that was there.
Mm-hmm.
And
it was built over top of a gun position, wasn't it?
It was flat on top of the fort. And when they wanted to wash the windows, you could step out and walk along the rim of the fort all the way around and do your window work. And there were 2 engines. And up in the southwest corner of the wall in the ceiling was the fog horn. And then against the wall as you entered the room were workbenches on both sides with windows above them.
So what would happen now? Say the fog came in, and what would happen? They turn on this equipment, and then this...
and the foghorn would start to blow. And if anything happened to these engines, on the north side of the building, on the rim of the fort, was a small iron shed or building that held the fog bell mechanism and bell. The bell was used if anything happened to the engines, that they couldn't use the fog horn.
I see.
Was it routine for you to be allowed to go up into the light itself?
Well, yeah, my granddad never bothered. I mean, I was the only one. He didn't let it, I mean, the other children were too small, and I was just hanging right on his...
But there were no strict rules against family members going in the light?
No. And he would put me to work. He'd give me a rag and some brass polish and, you know. And I tagged after him all over, and he'd walk, as you read there, we'd go hiking over the hills, and anything that was of interest that he thought I ought to know about, he'd stop and tell me about it. Like one day the beach was covered with onions. And he went into a long dissertation about how they raised onions up in the Delta. And they raised the onions, and he said then they have to transport them to market. And he said sometimes they can't afford the railroad trains, or they can't get the price that they want to sell them, so they just throw them in the river. And there just aren't any to buy. He tried to get it through to me, the economics of it. And he said so, and then he went on with the tides. How the tides went in and out and up the river and down and so forth. And he said now the tides brought these out. And he says they've probably gone all the way out near to the Farallones. And now he said the tide's coming in, so they floated in there on the beach. Things like that, you know. He'd stop and go through all this rigmarole, tell you these things.
And can you recall about some of the things on top of the building, if we had cannon in the fort at that time? And can you tell us about some of the things around the fort?
There were guns on top of the fort. They had not been removed. And they were taken down between 1910 and World War I. And my understanding is that the guns were sold for salvage to some man, I think they said his name was White. And he carted the guns down to what is now Crissy Field. There was a little crevice in the hillside there. And he stood the guns up in there and filled them with dynamite or what have you, and blasted them apart, and then took the pieces off to salvage.
Today is January 4th, 1994. This is Karana Hattersley Drayton, and I'm going to be interviewing Louise Cook and Josephine Hettel regarding their childhood experiences growing up at Fort Point. And this is, of course, regarding the Fort Point Lighthouse. This is an interview for the Presidio Oral History Project National Park Service. How is it that your dad came to work for what would have been the Lighthouse Service, right?
I don't know how he got into the Lighthouse Service, but he was stationed at Mile Rock, which has been decapitated.
Was that his first job as a lighthouse?
In the Lighthouse Service, yes.
Right, and he was an assistant lighthouse keeper?
Yes, there,
okay.
yeah, because he actually took a demotion because then he was only second assistant when we went to Fort Point because there was another, Mr. Jordan.
So Fort Point, you moved there in 23.
Yeah.
And what specifically, I mean, you may know some of this, you may not know, but what were his duties as assistant lighthouse?
They were on, how many hours were
They were on shifts.
Shifts, yeah, 8-hour shifts.
Mm-hmm.
3 of them.
Yeah.
So there'd be a swing.
And it would rotate around. The keeper did the same as the other.
Oh, well, that's fair.
The other two men, he didn't show any favoritism to himself.
Was that the keeper's prerogative? I mean, was he in control of that, or was that kind of a lighthouse service
I don't
rule?
know if it was a ruling or not, but I imagine it was.
Mm-hmm.
It would have to be because a lot of them were only two-man stations, so the one man couldn't do everything himself.
Well, no, but I mean just rotating swings.
Yeah.
They took care of the light. They had to take care of the light.
Polish it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the foghorn, when the fog, they had to keep on watch for the fog. The minute the fog came in, they had to get the motors going for the foghorn.
Mm-hmm.
And when that wasn't going, they had to ring a bell. But
and where was the bell?
Yeah, it was there. A little partition there of the fort jutted out.
Yeah.
And they built this these motors to run the foghorn. There were 2 motors there in a little office. And then right across the way was the lighthouse.
I assume you went up there, right?
Oh yeah, a lot of times.
So basically, he was doing what most lighthouse keepers doing. He was keeping records. He was
keeping the log, and over in here was where they built this house,
right?
That housed the engines. They also had a little office in the signal building where the.
Can I get you another cup of tea?
Maybe just some more hot water would be great. Were you kind of isolated from the rest of the Presidio, or did you feel connected?
No, connected. It was pleasant to be there. There was lots to do, and it was just a great place to grow up.
So you didn't feel isolated at all. It sounds like
never lonely, never any of those things. We had the trees and the hills, and we were
the flowers.
Always, outgoing and outdoors and doing something.
Very active.
We played on those cannons, on the big
the batteries.
Or the bunker. They had the guns were still there.
Now, what you call East Battery, or what bunker? Which one? Or up on top of the fort?
One that's right by the Golden Gate Bridge entrance.
All through in there.
There was all these batteries.
Yeah, and
with big cannons that you could get in there.
Turn the wheel
them around, and they
elevate it and make it come down. And we were as kids, we were very, very active and out all the time, hiking and
healthy. It's beautiful.
Fishing and swimming. We'd
helped us in our
hop on a boat to go across the bay. We used to hop on a boat from the mine dock. You know where that is?
No, I don't.
We remember the fleet coming in.
Yeah.
Remember the swims? They used to have these swim meets.
Looks like that's going on in that one picture.
It could be. We had those all
I don't
the
See,
time.
that would be awful rough there to swim.
Well, they did swim across there.
Yeah, I know.
They did.
But that's kind of far out.
Right.
We used to go get cockles down on the Crissy Field beach.
Then there was a little hole in the sand where
Yeah.
you'd know
could
that's
see-
You
where
get
they
your
were.
shovel, you start digging and
And you use them for what, or just for
like
fun?
eat them.
Oh,
They're like clams.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Were they still using Crissy as an airfield then? Do you remember planes still coming in?
Yeah. Army had it. See, Crissy, all those houses that are kind of beige, white, or whatever by the bridge there, they were all officers' quarters for the flyers that were stationed at Crissy Field.
Now, tell me a little bit about your house. I mean, it looks like a very pleasant building. You said it was 3 bedrooms?
Had 3 bedrooms upstairs.
Upstairs.
But no bathroom. Later, we understood that the back of the house, it was like an alcove that they took the wall out and made a bathroom.
That was upstairs, but there
Yeah.
was one downstairs.
Oh yeah, there was one lavatory downstairs, and the bathroom was on a room,
The far end of the,
the far end of the house, and then there was a washroom, and there was a dining room, a kitchen, and a parlor.
And did I assume that the housing was free though? I mean, you paid.
It was taken
Considered-
out of your salary.
I mean, they actually charged you for the house?
Well, $20. Well, I think it was included in your salary, but it was considered like $20
Okay, got
if
it.
I remember right. My father made $105 a month.
As lighthouse keeper families, did you feel like you had any traditions or anything that made you feel special, different?
No, I
We
never.
felt like we were the king of the road.
Oh, I don't think so.
Oh, I
You
do.
might have thought that,
No.
but I never.
We wouldn't let
did.
anyone get near that bridge.
Uh-huh.
Any of the kids from school came out. They couldn't.
Well,
They
they
were
did
not
anyway.
allowed to go on
Oh.
that bridge. That was ours.
But technically, could other kids walk across? That was probably off limits, wasn't it?
Well, you weren't supposed to because there was a sign, like I mentioned before.
They
that,
really weren't supposed to.
You
go
weren't
there.
supposed to go over there, and they weren't even supposed to come up where we lived either.
No.
That was private property.
But we did take possession.
Now, how much of the fort, I mean, could you get into? Because theoretically, you only went
All
across.
of it.
Yeah.
Aha.
Yes, it was completely. Yeah.
Ours. That was our playground. We had mats in there where we did exercises and acrobats, and we skated in there. And
Skated?
Yeah.
Roller skated? Like in the courtyard?
Yeah, and they played. A lot of the
Baseball.
adults came out. They played baseball.
that was our baseball.
Yeah.
Oh, see, now somehow I
diamond.
had the impression that it was off limits, it was closed.
Not
no,
to us.
No,
to
not
you.
then, no.
Interesting.
No.
Well, what do you remember? I mean, what did it look like at the time? Did it look pretty much like it did now, or were there some
No,
things?
there's changes. Things were more enclosed than they are now. Now they broke out all the.
Oh, like they had,
Yeah.
like where the galleries are, the
Yeah,
walkways with the sort of
yeah.
pretty open ironwork that was
They
closed
did
in.
they redid all of that.
Yeah, so they had probably closed things in and then they restored it. Is that what you're
Yeah.
thinking?
There was a couple
There was an
buggies
old
and
carriage
wagons
there.
in there.
Yeah, that's what your brother was saying.
Yeah.
Mm.
They had the army must have had some part in it because they had this. They occupied this.
Oh yeah, they did. A searchlight.
They had a
It's right next to that one that by the spiral staircase. It was a red tin building.
Mm-hmm. On the very
Yeah.
top of the fort.
They used to come that.
and I don't know what they were searching for.
Well, they used to
But
put
they
it
used
up
to
in the
put the
sky
searchlight
and
up in
look
the sky.
around for.
Oh. But when you were there in the 20s. Oh, that's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Now, your brother was saying that there was a cafeteria for workers in the bridge?
Oh, there was, yeah.
Inside the fort?
Inside of the fort, I think it was up in the second floor. Some woman ran it. I can't remember her name, but she sold like sandwiches, and it was awful cold in there.
Oh, I bet. The bridge, when they started to build the bridge, I guess they made lots of changes, or there were people.
Yeah, the
Say-
surveyors started coming out in 1928. And they would, because there was always a controversy that they could never put a bridge there because of the shale or whatever kind of ground was there. But then I guess they won their argument because they built the bridge and it's still standing.
Mm-hmm.
But it took a long time. We had already left when it wasn't,
When it was complete.
was not completed.
Oh, I see.
We left in 19 33, I guess, May, I think it was. They all left almost the same year as
It
we
was
did.
obsolete.
The other
The
families?
Cobbs and the
Yeah.
Jordans.
They all left one right after the other because they did away with the station.
Oh, they did away with the
Yeah.
station then?
Yeah.
See, they put everything on the bridge.
Uh-huh.
They put the
Yeah.
foghorn and all that.
Oh, I see. So you guys were the last lighthouse families there.
No, the Cobbs and the Jordans.
But I mean,
yeah.
the three
Yeah.
of you is
Yeah.
what I mean.
Mhm.
So that your father was not replaced when
No,
you
because
left.
he died while we were there.
Nobody took his
Your
place.
father died when you
Yeah.
said, oh.
That's why we had to move, but we would have had to move anyway because they were going to phase the station out, but we didn't know that at the time.
Did you have much of a sense of the history? I mean,
We didn't know nothing.
Yeah. Because, sometimes there's history and stories that come down and
It was just a place that we lived.
Today's interview is with Evan C. Slim Lambert. The date is May 25th, 1987. The interview is being conducted at the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco, California. The interviewer today is Harvey Schwartz. Mr. Lambert mentioned that there had been misinformation about the events surrounding the accident of February 1937 and about the events surrounding the death of Mr. Dummatzen. That this information had been seen in print and had existed in many people's minds since the time of the accident, and he wished here to set the record straight.
When I was picked up, I had a dead man by the feet. That was Fred Dummatzen. Well, he wasn't dead. He was alive then. And he was alive until we were coming in on the boat, on the crab fisherman's boat. On the way in, he died. And so it annoys me whenever I see that in print, because I had a choice. There were 2 or 3 people floating around when I finally got myself together and gathered up a couple of boards trying to stay afloat. And I went to him because he was still thrashing about and I knew he was alive. The others appeared to be done for. And people asked me, what went through your mind? The only thing that went through my mind was survival. I knew that to have a prayer, to survive, I had to hit the water feet first. And I managed to do it. I was hanging on to a piece of net that was hanging onto the staging. I was hanging on to it head first. And before we hit the water, I straightened up, let go of the net, straightened up, and hit feet first. The only problem with that was that I jammed down into that piece of net, both legs way down into that net, because it stopped temporarily when it hit the water, and I was still moving. And that's the only time I panicked during that whole thing. I was caught in the net, and the net was headed for the bottom, dragged down by that 6-ton staging. But at first, I couldn't get loose at all. I was fighting it. And then I finally calmed down and began to wiggle. And I slid right out of it. So there was a lot of debris floating in the water. The wooden deck of the staging, and wood that the workmen on the bridge were throwing over the side because they felt if anyone was alive, they'd have to have something to keep them afloat. So there was lots of rubbish in the water, wood. There were 2 or 3 people floating around when I finally got myself together. And I got a couple of planks together, and for myself at first, and then I saw Fred thrashing about, so I got him over the boards. And I went to him because he was still thrashing about, and I knew he was alive. The others appeared to be done for. So I got a hold of him, and I got him up on a couple of boards, and then I was going to see what I could do for others. But the minute I'd let go of him, the boards would go, and he'd start to go down. So I decided, better stick with what you got, because I knew he was alive. So I stayed with him. The others disappeared. But the Coast Guard came out, circled several times, but they never came far enough. They would always get out near me and then turn around and head back. And there was so much debris in the water, it'd be awful hard to see a person floating, you know, just their head sticking up. It'd be a real difficult job to spot us. But they actually didn't come far enough. So after a while, I heard this powerboat coming in, putt, 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 coming in from out at sea. And I looked around, and here was this crab fishing boat. And one man, and he was at the helm, and he was looking at all this stuff in the water up ahead, trying to figure out what in the world had happened, what was going on. And he kept looking from side to side, and he almost went by us. He was some little distance off. I would guess maybe 50 yards from us. And he was almost by, and he took another look around, and his eye hit me. And what a relief. I figured, my gosh, we're going to make it. So I told you about getting into the boat. Well, then he tried to get me to put Fred on one side of the engine, and I stood on the other. And he tried to get me to lie down by the engine, but I was going to be tough. I knew if I lay down, I'd never get up. So I stood on the way in, crouched over that engine, trying to get a little heat. It was terribly cold. And he took us into the Coast Guard pier, which is out near the bridge. And then when it came time to try and get off the boat, I collapsed. Of course, I couldn't walk. So I didn't walk off after all.
Do you remember going to the hospital?
Yes, they put me in an ambulance, and they went to, I think it was the third hospital before they accepted me because I was an industrial accident. So I think I went to St. Mary's. I'm not sure. I really don't remember how long I was in there. But not very long, I don't think, maybe 10 days. And I came out, I was wearing an airplane splint, you know, the kind they stick up over your head. And I had that on for a month, I guess, while my shoulder was healing.
Were you around in May when they had a celebration walking across the bridge after the...
Yeah, I was still working.
Did you went back to work after you were hurt?
Yes.
What kind of work were you doing when you went back?
I think I was in charge of cleanup on the deck. I don't think I ever went down on the staging there. So I never really had to work with my hands after that. I was just supervising on the main deck, on the cleanup. Because I was still there the day the bridge opened. We were still doing the final bit of cleanup.
Can you describe the celebration they had in May of '37 when it opened?
Well, it was something on the order of this one. The people walked across the bridge, very few compared to now, nothing like that mob that hit the bridge yesterday. And automobiles crossed with dignitaries, and there was a lot of hoopla. It was much the same, only of course not near as big.
What were your feelings at the time?
Well, I was still working, so I was concentrating on getting the job done. They tried to get it all done before the opening day, but you know how those things are. We were still there with trucks taking lumber, all kinds of stuff off the bridge and getting it cleaned up.
Did you have a sense of this being something special?
Oh, absolutely.
A big achievement?
Everybody that worked on the bridge knew it was special. Everybody. I'm sure any man that ever had anything to do with that bridge thought of it as his bridge. Of course, none of us ever dreamed we'd be around when they celebrated the 50th anniversary. That wouldn't have occurred to us.